Hey guys, this is Billy from AdultCello.com, and today what I want to talk about is how to stop hitting adjacent strings. This is probably I don't know, top three most annoying kind of problems that occur. You start playing, you're starting to pull a beautiful ribbon of sound, you're starting to put the two hands together, starting to learn some repertoire and play pieces, and then for some reason, as you're playing, you just on certain notes at certain times, you just start hearing your bow scratching against the adjacent string, making either a metallic sound or just actually hearing the pitch of the string itself, and it's very unwanted and very annoying. So this may seem like kind of not a difficult thing to fix. It's like, okay, I just make sure I play on one string. But it's actually harder than it seems for a lot of people, including me when I was starting, and it was because, the fingerboard is curved, and the way we pull a bow stroke to be correct and straight, quote unquote, is very counterintuitive. It doesn't feel linear at all, and so you really sort of want to be very precise and mechanically observant in what you're doing, and then you can finally rid yourself of this habit. So what we're going to work on today is I want to kind of basically break down exactly what you need to know, and then I'm going to give you some actionable exercises that is exactly what I would do to make it take the least amount of time possible. Keep in mind, this is a muscle memory kind of thing. I don't think you can just sit down and be like, okay, 48 hours, I'm going to put in crazy work, and then I'll never have this happen to me again. Your bowing will improve dramatically probably if you do that, but it's just not the kind of thing that is instantly solved. Usually it takes kind of measured, consistent practice because it's building the muscle memory. So what I would do, practice this maybe 5 minutes minimum to however long you can basically stand it. Do it separate from your other practice. Don't work on repertoire while you're working on this. All right, so let's dive right in. We're going to talk about two parts of the bow mechanics today that directly involve the ability to pull a bow stroke without hitting adjacent strings. The first is we have to talk about pulling a straight bow, okay, and we will. And then the second part is we're going to talk about kind of the arm height, and that's going to be in two parts. All right, so part one, we're going to talk about a straight bow. Not really what a straight bow is, because most of us know within the first week or two of playing that a straight bow is quote unquote not straight, and it just means that the stick and the hair of the bow is parallel to the bridge on whatever string you're on. What I'd like to talk about is more how to make sure that you are playing with the straight bow. So here's a great little exercise to teach your arm exactly what it needs to do to pull a straight bow. So I'm going to go on the D string, all right, and I'm going to put my bow at the frog directly on the bridge, okay? So this is not about creating a nice sound. It's not really about creating sound at all, okay? And I'm just going to start bowing, and my only goal is to keep the hair of the bow on the bridge as I pull. Okay, so I'm literally tracing the bridge. Okay, and as I pull out, it's actually harder than it seems, or harder than it looks. That's going to show me exactly what a straight bow would be, and then if I want to check my work, you can check in a mirror as you do this. I would do that throughout this little exercise, and then you go ahead, take the bow with both hands, and you can just gently drag the bow up without changing the orientation of the stick, because that would just undo all the work you just did. Okay, so you find it, you're parallel, you're right on the bridge, just drag up without changing the bow's orientation, and boom, you have it straight to the bridge. Okay, parallel, straight bow parallel to the bridge. Each string is wildly different. For the A string, for example, what I found when I was learning was that my arm, the further I got towards the tip, my arm just had to be much, much, much further away from my body than I thought it would be, and it wasn't as much about bringing my arm up to get to the tip as out, like rowing. Okay, so keep that in mind. Each string is going to feel different, and that's the point. That's probably why you're hitting adjacent strings, is that's not completely dialed in. Once you've done this a number of times, I'm going to give you a little exercise. I call it 2-inch bows. You can go ahead, find your bow angle by tracing the bridge at the frog. Just bring it up, okay, nice and parallel. and then you're just going to pull 2 inches and stop and check your work in the mirror. Okay, did it instantly get crooked one way or the other, or was it pretty straight? Okay, and you just keep going 2 inches at a time, each time looking in the mirror. Okay, this is not the time to obsess about having like the most beautiful sound you've ever created. You're just literally moving the bow. You want a solid sound, okay, but you don't. The priority here is checking your work in a mirror and making sure that your bow remains straight. Okay, then that's 2 inches. You could then do maybe 4-inch bows, which would be, you know, just slightly longer. And so on and so forth all the way. And then you could break the bow up into thirds. And then you could break the bow up into halves. And then finally full bows. And just checking your work to make sure that you are now pulling truly a straight bow. All right, so that gets us part of the way there, okay? Because the bow, you're pulling it straight parallel to the bridge. That's a big piece of the puzzle, but it's not the only piece. The other thing we have to talk about is arm height, when you're bowing, and then I'm going to call it like bow angle, and I'll explain what that means. So arm height, just in my opinion, when I'm bowing, I want my right elbow. I don't want it ever to really sink too much below my hand, okay? If it's at the level of my hand, that's good. For me, in my opinion, for D, G, and A string, if it's even above the height of my hand, that's even better. It makes it easier to pull a nice sound. And it makes it easier to keep the bow straight, okay? Parallel to the bridge like we just worked on. The issue is, if you get into a habit of changing your arm height throughout the bow stroke in a bad way, it can actually pull the bow kind of off kilter. So if my hand is low, even though I'm, if I raise my arm, I'm still parallel to the bridge. Because my arm was getting lower as I was pulling, it just naturally made me switch onto the G string. That happens often also in the D string. If you're pulling and you start lifting your arm too much and changing that way, even if you're keeping this plane, okay, and it's parallel to the bridge, if you start lifting your arm while staying parallel to the bridge, you'll change onto the A string. Okay, so that's why you have to establish the correct arm height, and that's something to think about. The best way to attack that, in my opinion, is what I call kind of the bow angle. So let's go ahead and practice that. We're going to put the bow at the frog on the D string. Okay, and I don't know if you've ever looked at this kind of thing before, but the first time I looked, I was fascinated by it. When I rest my bow on the D string, I'm not touching the G or the A string, but that doesn't mean that there's the same amount of space between, like the same amount of clearance, we'll call it, okay, between the hair of the bow and the G string, the hair of the bow and the A string, okay? So I'll put it up here. So right now, I'm technically playing the D string, but if you look carefully, I have very little clearance before hitting the A string, and I have a whole bunch extra clearance before I'd have to get to the G string. Okay, vice versa, I'm still going to play the D string, but now I'm much, much closer to the G string, and I have a lot of clearance on the A string. That is actually something you're going to use. The longer you play cello, you start shading towards strings, especially for passages that have a lot of, string crossings, rapid string crossings between two strings. For today's purposes, if your issue is that you can't seem to bow without hitting an adjacent string, your goal today is to place the bow on the D string and have the exact amount of clearance between the A string and the G string, okay? And then again, we're just going to do a 2-inch bow and check our work. Check our work. And so as you pull, you might notice, you're going along, things look good, and then suddenly you're starting to edge closer and closer to the A string, or you're edging closer and closer to the G string, if you're on the D string, for example. That's a cue that there's something wrong with the mechanics of your arm, okay? And so you have to keep you have to kind of then problem solve. Okay, what do I do? I need more clearance on the G string, so that probably means I'm just like things are starting to dip. Maybe I need to go out a little further. That kind of solution is completely like situation to situation, so I can't like tell you exactly what to do. But it gives you the information you need, and it also shows you where in the bow this starts to happen. Okay, so that's kind of where in your bow stroke things start to get a little squirrely. While working on this, I just want to add also that this is really, really good work to do for the two middle strings, because those are the strings where you could kind of have an issue either way, in the sense that if I'm on the G string, for example, there's a chance I could kind of shade the wrong way and hit the D string, or I could even hit the C string. So there's like pitfalls on either side. If I'm on the C string and I have way too much clearance from the G, there's a chance I could bow into the cello, or sometimes I would practice and then I would see like a nice layer of rosin on this, one or both of my C bouts, and that's because I was clearing by too much, and actually instead of hitting an extra string, I was just basically bowing onto my cello right onto the C bouts. Okay, so just really focus on the middle strings for this. So, and then you would do the same thing. You got your 2-inch bows, you do 4-inch bows, 6-inch, break it into thirds, break it into halves, and then full bows. It's always great to watch in mirror, but what I love about this exercise in particular, when you're staring at the clearance to either string, is that you can kind of look more how you'd be look as if you were actually playing a piece. You're not going to be like just staring into a mirror, and that's not how most of us end up looking. That's not where we end up looking when we play, but looking straight down, that's a great place to look while you're playing cello at your bow. Okay, so those two together, between making sure that the bow is straight parallel to the bridge and making sure that your arm is in a good place and that you have equal clearance from either string, that should completely take care of this. Keep in mind, like I said, it takes a little bit of time to kind of work it in. So the minute you'll get it on open strings, you'll be like, boom, got this, great. And then you start playing a piece and you're like, oh my God, it came back. That's just because now you've got your left hand going, you've got string crossings, you got all these things happening, and it just takes a little bit of time, okay? But it's really developing that 3D memory of where your arm needs to be in space on each string, ideally, so that you're not in danger of hitting a string when you don't want to. Okay, so there you go. That's how to stop hitting those adjacent strings and start getting just beautiful, pure sounds on cello. I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next week.